Happy Sabbath. Wait, the mic is on. Happy Sabbath, church. I didn't expect myself to come on so heavy voiced. All right. Let me open my laptop. Super professional. I got my dress and jacket, my two-piece suit. And I feel look nice and thing. But the pleasure is mine to speak to you this morning on the topic Stronger Together. When I was requested to speak, I'm going to say requested because I was not asked. I was told, and I said okay to speak. I didn't really know. It's a simple topic, but it's sort of hard to construct what seems understood. Does that make sense? You know, when something's so simple, you're like, how do you explain something we all should know? But it's something we tend to get wrong a lot of the time. So I'm hoping for the next 20, 25, 30, if the Spirit gives me inspiration, minutes, we'll explore this topic together. Stronger Together. So the memory verse is taken from Ecclesiastes 4. But if you look at the whole book of Ecclesiastes, it's a book of wisdom. But not just wisdom, it's quite a cynical, depressive book because it's the wisdom that comes from experience and frustration. You have Proverbs, which is a bit more upbeat. Songs of Solomon, which I don't read because I'm single. No, I'm not. I'm joking. But, you know, that's a book for the lovers. And then Ecclesiastes, which is a book expressing the frustration that comes with having lived a long life and experiencing it for all its beauty and all its horror at the same time. Ecclesiastes is Solomon's deep dive into the meaning or meaninglessness of life. He's asking the difficult questions that we often don't want to ask because they're scary and maybe we don't want the answers to them. Is my living in vain? What have I been put on this planet to do? Is the thing that I've dedicated my life to actually making sense? These are all difficult questions we don't really want to ask because we don't want to have to tackle them. But in Ecclesiastes, Solomon asks these tough questions. He explores the vanity of many facets of life that we idolize, weighing up the value of the things that we put our trust in and our hope in. So in Ecclesiastes 1, we're sort of brought in and Solomon just starts with vanity, vanity, vanity. Life is vanity and there's no hope. You know, life is hopeless, it's pointless. Without God, there's no meaning to life. He talks about the cycles of life. He talks about the cycles in nature. Generation after generation comes and goes and nothing really changes. No one remembers them. The wind goes up north and then it blows down south and it does that again. The river flows into the sea and never fills it up. The sun rises and it falls and day in, day out, day in, day out. What is the meaning of life? He then moves into Ecclesiastes 2 where he talks about the lust for life. And he talks about if I could have done everything, and Solomon probably did do everything he wanted to do in his life. And he's saying, now that I've done all that I wanted to do and all that I could do and nobody could tell me no, what do I have to show for it in the end? Ecclesiastes 3 speaks about the times and the seasons and how in life, no matter how powerful or smart or unfortunate you are, we are all subject to the times and seasons. There's a time for happiness and there's a time for sadness. And when the time for sadness comes, no amount of money is going to buy you out of the sadness. And when the time for happiness comes, no amount of trial is going to rob you of your happiness. There's a time and a season for it all. We get to Ecclesiastes 4, and here Solomon warns us against the vanity and futility of living selfishly, living for ourselves. So we're going to explore 5 relationship goals in this time. It's going to be community, productivity, stability, intimacy, and security. And we're going to see how from Ecclesiastes 4 verse 7 to 12, we explore these 5 different themes and what they mean for us as the body of Christ. So if I read Ecclesiastes 7 to 12, I'm going to read it in the NIV. It says, "Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone who had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. 'For whom am I toiling?' he asked, 'and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. 2 are better than 1, because they have good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken.'" So when we talk about being stronger together, the first thought that comes to my mind is community. We as a church are a community of believers, a family, not by blood, but by the blood of Christ. And it's so amazing because we've been in Woolsden for 25 years. And I honestly see you guys as my family. You know, yes, I do. But not just so much as that thing that you say, but we've had birthdays together, funerals together, seen people's wedding, child blessings, picked up people's children from school, all sorts of things. We've been there for each other. You cannot build community in isolation. In the creation story, God created everything and he said it was right. He made the sun, he made the stars, he made the moon, he made the plants, he made the animals, and he said it was good. What was the first thing that God said was not good? For man to be alone. After creating everything, God says there's something even more important than I have to create, and that's union. God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." This was the first time in the creation process that God had said something was not good. Everything up to this point that the Lord had made, he had reviewed and determined it as good. Our factory settings are to be in union. That is how human beings work. We are made to be together. We do not work well in isolation. Community keeps us strong. Community protects us. Community gives us a sense of identity. If we look at the man spoken about in Ecclesiastes 4, he was all alone. He had neither a son nor a brother, and there was no end to his toil. Many hands makes the work light. Working in community makes the load easier to bear. This man was working non-stop and still he could not see the end of his work. Sometimes the work that we do for the church, we may not see the end in our lifetime, but the end will appear for someone else. The ministry that you start may not feed your community here, but it might feed your future community, the generations down the line. But community is essential to building a strong bond and working together in the church. So in verse 8, it highlights that this man was alone. He had neither son nor brother, and there was no end to his toil. And then it contrasts this in verse 9 by saying, "2 are better than 1, for they have a good return for their labor." So this moves on to our second point. We've established community. Let's talk about productivity. 2 are better than 1 because the amount of work that you put in, the amount that you get out makes sense. Double the effort, double the rewards. In Exodus 18, we find the story of Moses. And Moses spent all day judging the affairs of the people. And when Jethro, his father-in-law, came to see him, did Jethro say, "Well done for doing all of this by yourself? Well done for managing this on your own?" He said, "No, my son, you are working harder, not smarter." He said, "You need to delegate it to some trusted people so that the workload is not too much on you." Being able to split the workload meant that more people's needs were met. This is so important because a lot of the times when working in church, our departments are our babies and we want to manage them the way that we want to manage them. And there can be a lot of good that you can do, but the good that one person can do only goes so far. The good that a team of people do goes further. But that requires letting go of the reins and understanding you're not the only one who can do the job. There's someone else who can do it, maybe better, maybe worse. A job half done is better than a job not done at all. So we find that example in Exodus 18 of overworking, and Solomon describes that as meaningless. Stretching yourself to prove what? That you can do it, that you're a one-man army. What meaning is there in that? This man in Ecclesiastes 4 was hardworking. When we read verse 8, it says, "There was no end to his toil." But what was he achieving by all this work? Sometimes we are so obsessed with the work that we forget who and why we're doing it for. We're running around, picking up tents, going through curriculum, doing meetings, and we fill our day, and have we stopped to speak to the children that we're ministering to? Have we stopped to find out how they're doing? Okay, well done. They've recited their PBE Bible verses, but do you know how their week was? Sometimes we get caught up in the work and not who we are working for. We're concerned with running a good department that we forget that a department is simply a tool of ministry. It's simply a way, and not the only way either. And I would encourage my young people, sometimes we feel like because we haven't been elected, and this is actually for everyone, because you haven't been elected into a nominated position that you can't work for the Lord. A department's only one way of working. There are many ways of doing ministry. And in being zealous in our work, we need to not make the work the idol over the people we are doing the work for. 1 Corinthians 14:12 says, "Even so you, since you are zealous for spiritual gifts, let it be for the edification of the church that you seek to excel." When you go for your TLT, SLT, ABC, DBE training, when you put all those letters at the end of your name, what are you doing it for? Is it for the edification of someone else? Or is it to say that you did it? Is it for all the nice little badges on your sash, which are very nice? I wish I could have one, but I'm not going to do all that stuff. But are we doing all of this for ourselves or for what those skills can help us do for someone else? Moving on to the third point, stability. Verse 10 says, "If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up." Now, it's hard for us to think of this because we are, in a first world country in the 21st century. But in ancient Israel, there were no roads. They weren't paved. They weren't smooth. There were rugged roads, sandy, no real form, full of rocks, easy trip hazards. People fell all the time. People fell and hurt themselves. People fell and died on the road. So they would travel in communities as a form of safety and stability. If someone fell, there would be someone to pick them up. I think our society now has sort of trained us to be individualistic and do our own thing and live alone. And a lot of us, not just in church, but in the wider community, have fallen and no one has come to pick us up. in these walls, there are members who have fallen and we have not picked them up. We have left them there. We've actually been like the priest and the Levite who have walked past our members who have fallen down. We can't work. We are only as strong as our weakest member. If we let ourselves fall by the wayside, what happened to one will become two, will become three, will become four, and then it'll become the culture of the church to leave people behind. And that is not what Christ envisions for his body. And there are times where we fall for different reasons. We can fall because of exhaustion. We can fall because of illness. We can fall because of sin in our own lives or trauma or stress. Galatians 6 verse 1-2 says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ." Now, I want to take this to a wider definition. To not just say if you're overtaken by any trespass. If you're overtaken by any illness, any job loss, any depression, any difficult situation, any persecution, you who claim you are spiritual, you who come to church every Sabbath, you who are here for Sabbath school, you who have done your memory verse, you who are here every Wednesday at prayer meeting, you who claim you are spiritual, your job isn't to fill the pews, your job is to restore the person with a spirit of gentleness. Considering yourself lest you be tempted. Consider yourself, because if you don't pick them up, when you fall, who will be there to pick you up? A lot of the times, we think that bad only happens to one person. Bad can happen to us all, and the culture that you encourage in your church is the culture that will meet you when you fall down. If your culture is to leave people behind, when you get left behind, you shouldn't be shocked. We need to foster the environment that we wish to see in our church. Point 4, intimacy. Verse 11 says, "Also if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can you keep warm alone?" You cannot develop intimacy on your own. Right? And I know intimacy tends to be very romantic, but it's more than that. Intimacy, I know you guys hear it all the time, it's into me, see. See into me and see me for who I am. That only happens in community. And that only happens in communities where people are allowed to be themselves, are allowed to make mistakes, are allowed to be vulnerable. I love this church because I've been allowed to be myself. And sometimes myself gets corrected. Sometimes myself doesn't do everything right, but I'm allowed to be myself. I'm allowed to be flawed. I'm allowed to have a temper and cuss a little. I'm allowed. And sometimes when I go out of line, I'm brought back in, but my shortcomings are never attached to me as my identity. And that's one thing I love about Woolsden. Whenever we talk about each other or people who have left and come back, they always say she or he is a child of Woolsden. They're a child of Woolsden because Woolsden is a church, and I hope and I pray that it continues, that allows people to be who they are. A person can only enter into intimacy with you if they trust you, that when they are vulnerable and they show their ugly side, you will still be there for them. You will allow them to not be perfect. There's a phrase that goes, "A friend lets you make a fool out of yourself, but lets you know that that's not a permanent position." You can be a fool at times, but that doesn't make you a fool. You can mess up at times, but that doesn't make you a mess. You can be a failure at times, but that doesn't mean you failed at this thing called life. But you need the space to do that. A lot of times we struggle with church because we're here performing a role. And the energy that we spend pretending to be perfect, pretending to be good, is energy that could be spent building community, being vulnerable, being open. People can't work the way the Holy Spirit wants them to if they are pretending to be something else. And we know that because the word says that when you come to God, come to him as you are. You can't lie to him. So why do we lie to each other? If we are meant to be God to someone else and show his mercy and his grace to each other, why are we making it so difficult for one another? The Bible says while we were still sinners, God loved us. While we were in our mess and we didn't look good and, we didn't have the matching red dress and red jacket and shoes from Simi for £15.99. While we weren't all put together, he loved us. And if that's the standard that he has set from us, we do ourselves a disservice by not extending that grace to someone else. And point 5, security. Though one may be overpowered, from verse 12, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Consider the story of the Good Samaritan. In Luke 10, as Jesus was telling this parable, he says, a certain man went down to Jerusalem, to Jericho, and this man was traveling alone. He was traveling a dangerous road alone. And is that necessarily what he wanted to do? Maybe not. But how many roads have we had to travel down because somebody wasn't there to hold our hand? You still have to get from A to B. Life doesn't stop and you have to continue, but sometimes you have to do the journey on your own. But when you do the journey on your own, that makes you vulnerable to those who don't have the best intentions for you. And we see what happened with the story of the Good Samaritan. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. In church, we should defend each other fiercely. Don't be quick to pass on that gossip that you heard. Don't be quick to say so-and-so did this and did that and I saw sister. When you come to me and you tell me about someone else, I should be so fiercely angry you'll never come to me again with news about that person. We should defend one another quicker than we judge one another. There's security in community. But the moment that you can't trust one another because of gossip, backbiting, judgment, that community, that security network falls apart. And then you are open to the robbers on the street. You are open to those who wish bad against you. Not just in a physical sense, but we need to protect each other in prayer. We need to pray for one another. I can't be there all the time, but I can pray to the one who is. I can't see everything that goes on in your life, but I can pray to the one who sees. I can petition on your behalf for whatever you're going through. We need to pray for one another. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. The 3 strands is you, me, and God. We keep God at the center and he binds us together. A lot of relationships fall apart because the thing we put at the center does not make sense. We put ego at the center. We put our department at the center. We put our title at the center. We put our way at the center. In James it says, the thing that tears you apart is your desire to rule over one another. You want it your way, when you want it, how you want it. And that bond that ties us is loose. God is what unites us in our differences. God is the one who's going to tell me, you had your turn last time, it's someone else's turn. God is the one who's going to tell me, you're not as smart as you think you are. Actually, that is the better way to do it. God is the one who's going to tell me, you don't need to lead this time, you can support. But when we put other things on that pedestal, when we put other things in that bond, it falls apart. So if we see the progression of Ecclesiastes 4, in verse 8, we see it starts with one man. From verse 9 to 11, it speaks about the benefit of 2. But in verse 12, it finishes with the power of 3. If you want to go fast, go on your own. If you want to go far, you go together. We need one another. We get tired. This life isn't easy. You need someone to rely on. You can only go so far on your own. You can only go so far with someone else. But with Christ, you can go all the way. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. What we do in this building is mutual discipleship. I learn from you, you learn from me, you teach me, I teach you. The purpose of the church family is to lead each other towards Christ. And some of us have succeeded in our vertical relationship, but we struggle in the horizontal. But everyone has a role to play. Set expectations for your young people. This is Pathfinder Day. They don't need to be mollycoddled. Help them live up to their potential. We have got smart, resourceful young people who are able to walk that journey with you. I know sometimes as adults, and I'm technically an adult now, sometimes as adults we think that the discipleship goes one way. We teach them, we show them, we whatever. But it's mutual. There's so much we learn from them, good and bad. There's things that they can teach us, a perspective that we've never seen before, way of doing things, new technology, new words, new phrases. Sometimes even mischief they get up to that you've never seen before makes you sharper. Them things they get up to at camp, you never even planned to deal with that. And look, now you're aware of the different things that happen. But it's mutual. This community, we're stronger together. We're stronger together. We build one another up. So I'm going to read the verse one more time. 2 are better than 1 because they have good return for their labor. If either one of them falls, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. My prayer for this church is that we bind ourselves to each other and we bind ourselves to Christ. He is our uniting, our common denominator. He's the one that makes this possible. He's the one that makes it possible for us to love each other, for us to be gracious to each other, to have patience for one another. He helps us build community. And my prayer is that as we continue on this journey, we consider one another, we love on one another, we build each other up. So when Christ returns, he finds a church that he died for, a church that is like him, a church that shows his love both inside and outside. Amen. Pastor, would you like to come up?